Nah, what the DE? Y'all crazy for this one. As sets besides, Ember is actually pretty good. I personally never played her all that much, but with her recent very light rework, which was mainly focused on fixing her energy economy, and of course the deliverance of her heirloom skin, thought it was time to light her back up, and boy do I have some cool builds for y'all. Or hot, I guess I should say. 3 different setups on the schedule today, 2 focused on making her a wildly strong nuke frame, and the third a more basic weapons platform style build, but I promise you, it won't disappoint. She's actually way more versatile than I thought. Inferno is her signature fort ability and the basis of our first 2 setups, causing Ember to summon literal fire meteors from the sky to crash down on enemies. Targeting here works a little oddly. Enemies do not need to be within line of sight from Ember herself, but rather just viewable on screen, which means that enemies here will be struck, but even if Ember can see them, turning like this means that nothing happens when you cast it. Another interesting factor of this ability is how energy cost is determined. You may have noticed during the previous clip that even with 0 enemies on screen, it can be cast, yet also not cost any energy. That is because drain here is determined per enemy with a cap of 10. At base efficiency, this will cost 10 energy per for a total of 100, but don't worry, there is not a cap of 10 enemies per cast. This is purely for energy purposes, which efficiency does play into. Now for the actual effects of the ability, enemies struck will take an evenly distributed base 2500 heat and impact damage with a forced heat proc. Following that, surviving enemies will be surrounded by a ring of fire 5 meters wide, dealing scaling heat damage that will spread itself to unafflicted enemies with their own separate duration. Like a lot of other nuking abilities though, alone it doesn't really do all that much, which is where the rest of her kit comes into play. Her third, Fire Blast, will send out a wave of fire towards enemies, striking those either on screen or within line of sight from Ember, dealing heat damage with a forced proc, and importantly, stripping between 50 and 100% of their armor. Said scaling controlled by her second ability, Immolation. Immolation introduces us to her unique mechanic, the heat gauge, which is shown here. While very complicated with a lot of different formulas and shit, basically, this ability grants a scaling damage reduction towards Ember on its own, dictates the armor strip per cast on Fire Blast, and also increases the damage on Inferno, all dictated by the percentage shown here. Said percentage also happens to be controlled by her other base abilities, with Inferno and Fireball working to increase it, while Fire Blast will decrease it. All of these percentages and such are shown on the abilities themselves, and with that, we can start discussing how to actually play a build like this. We want to maintain 90% immolation as much as possible, with it granting the most damage reduction and damage towards Inferno. So remember when I said that Inferno can be cast without enemies on screen, so it effectively takes 0 energy? That still adds to the immolation growth, which means that just spamming Inferno at the ground will allow you to stack it up very quickly, and we need that because Fire Blast removes 50% of this meter per cast, but we also need to have it at 90% to make Inferno deal damage from armor stripping. I'm sure you understand at this point. With that being said, Inferno still unfortunately isn't killing that quickly, even against a battle group, leading me to our first build with Roar over her 1. Roar buffs ability damage, and with Dot specifically, double dips on them due to its coding as faction damage. With Roar here, don't forget that Ember's passive grants her 5% more ability strength per enemy afflicted with heat that is uncapped, allowing us to get some pretty crazy numbers on Roar with some priming beforehand, which leads me to yet another damage boosting tech, Heat Inherit. Heat Inherit is pretty well known, I'd say at this point, but for those unaware, Heat works differently from other infinitely stacking dots. Adding a proc will add both a stack of heat, obviously, and refresh the duration of all prior heat procs, which allows for infinitely scaling linear damage as long as it is continuously refreshed. Uniquely though, the very first heat proc applied on an enemy will scale the modded heat percent bonus and faction damage of all further procs regardless of where they come from. You can't mod faction damage and more heat percent onto an ability. That's literally impossible, but for a gun, that's just how you mod them. All abilities that deal heat damage are considered as having 100% base heat damage. By modding a secondary with primed heated charge and scorch though, we can increase that by 225%. And the subsequent faction mod also multiplicatively increases it like Roar, double dipping of course. And if you're using something like Epitaph, which you should, also modding Virulon provides even more damage bonuses that turn our Ember from this to this. Much better, right? Build-wise, here's what we're working with. Healing Flame is pretty necessary for survival as it grants Ember Overguard on cast if at max HP, which it also refills. Since Fire Blast is crucial towards dealing damage, this should stay always active, and Overguard has other benefits like Prime Sure-Footed effects, alongside status negation and a short 0.5 second gate on break. Exothermic, on the other hand, helps with energy management by causing kills on those affected by Inferno a 15% chance to drop an energy orb. Archon Vitality doubles the heat procs from Inferno, which is essentially a free damage double on the dot, and also at max rank adds some health for us to cushion with. Some good range and duration with strength mods and arcanes to scale damage, and Streamline will combo with Energize and Seismic Bond on Panzer to give us 160 efficiency. Panzer is pretty nice here for that, as if you don't feel like priming with an Epitaph, this will passively spread viral everywhere. Focus school wise, I 100% recommend Matarai for casting speed, though that can be swapped out if you have casting speed shards, which you'll definitely appreciate as this is an ability focused build. And that is Roar Ember. It's really quite simple, but also quite effective if you fancy playing her, which with this skin, well, yeah. Can't wait to see how Ember usage goes up just because of this. I don't know what they were thinking. But if you want something more interesting, might I interest you in Sickening Pulse, a Helminth exclusive ability. Sickening Pulse, when combined with Ember, or really any heat status, will add a singular stack of heat onto enemies that has combined the entirety of all prior procs damage into one, and unlike other statuses, will dip again on faction damage for essentially a triple dip. KPM wise, after some testing, this and Roar are really close, but this is a far more active build, with the rotation requiring you to prime, cast her 3, cast her 4, and then hit them with Pulse, but I find this one much more fun. I don't know, Roar is just kind of boring. The build for this is exactly the same minus the swap of prime continuity for Augur Secrets. To cast Pulse, the first cast must have already ended, so we don't want that much duration, as you do end up spamming this quite a bit, but otherwise just follow the previously mentioned rotation. This build has a higher damage cap than Roar due to the stacking nature of Pulse, but it also will immediately cap out any viral stacks on enemies to 10 from your Panzer for a staggering 325% damage increase, which is also pretty good. Differing from the nuke builds though is a weapons platform setup in which I like to use Gloom. There is a myriad of options here, but Gloom is great on Ember because she can easily achieve the 272 strength necessary for a full 95% slow on enemies because of her passive. The build is pretty different now as we are relying on health tanking through damage reduction and Gloom self-heal, but the main proponent here is her first ability augment, Fireball Frenzy, which adds a ton of heat damage onto your weapons, making her a really solid weapons platform for kind of any gun. Which gun am I using? It's the Aki Core. Yeah, I know, this thing is everywhere, but you can also just use whatever you want here. Benefit of a weapons platform setup is that they are just that, a platform to make your weapons really good. Thank you so much for watching this one. I hope one of these 3 builds worked for you guys or works for you in the future. Ember is admittedly still a little underpowered from where I would like her to be. She can nuke, but it requires you to really invest in it entirely, and I know a lot of people don't want to go through all the hoops I mentioned in this video just to do that, but that's what you gotta do. Regardless, if you'd like to get my content like this one early, and more importantly, just help me out, feel free to join either my Patreon or YouTube memberships for just $5 a month. You'll receive content like this early and a bunch of other behind the scenes stuff. A big thank you to all of my current supporters. I appreciate you lots. If you want to come hang out, also check out my Twitch and Discord. I'm active on both of there quite a lot and would love to see you. Hope you enjoyed this one. I'll see you soon. Peace.